Firstly, I'd like to say Happy Hanukkah, second night of Hanukkah. And secondly, I'd like to say, I hope you're sitting comfortably. I'm going to read a story. In the ancient city of Constantinople lived a nice Jewish doctor by the name of Nissim Rachamim. He was a scholar and a beloved physician, well known to all for his wise and kind treatment of his patients. NHS. When news of this doctor reached the ears of the Sultan, he began to ask many questions about Nissim. How much does he charge? The Sultan was always asking questions because he was so curious about everything in the world and was surrounded by many wise men who knew many things. One day, the Sultan summoned Nissim Rachamim to come before him, and as they spoke, the Sultan became amazed at Nissim's wisdom and ways. Maybe he washed his hands. At the conclusion of their meeting, the Sultan appointed Nissim to be his personal physician. As time went by, Nissim and Sultan actually became friends. Not only would Nissim visit the Sultan in the palace, but the Sultan would also visit Nissim in his home. It's called a home visit. It so happened that on the last night of Chanukah, the Sultan came for a visit. When he entered the house, he saw the glow of the Chanukah lamp and was filled with the happiness that he had not felt before. He saw the whole family sitting around the table eating pancakes and playing with a spinning top. The doctor welcomed the guest and invited the Sultan to sit at the table with them and offered to teach him how to play the game of dreidel. Immediately, the Sultan drew his chair closer and accepted the offer. You see, each of us has a pile of nuts that we use in place of coins, because gambling's wrong. Each of us takes a turn spinning the dreidel, which has a Hebrew letter engraved on each side. Each letter, Nun, Gimel, Chay, Shin, stands for a Hebrew word. When the dreidel falls on the Nun, nothing happens. No one wins or loses any nuts. When it falls on the Gimel, then the player wins all the nuts in the middle. Hay means that the player receives half of the nuts, and Shin means that the player loses and puts all his nuts in the middle. The Sultan listened carefully and soon was playing easily, and often the dreidel would fall on Gimel. You say that the Hebrew letters stand for words. What words, Nissim? They stand for Nes Gadol Haya Sham, which means a great miracle happened there, answered Nissim. A miracle? What miracle? asked the Sultan. So Nissim told the Sultan about the Maccabees and why they fought and how they defeated the armies of Antiochus. Then he continued his narrative, explaining how the Jews arrived at the temple in Jerusalem and how they rededicated it with the holy oil. The miracle? It was all a miracle from God, but the miracle of renewed hope and rededication of a little pot of oil that continued to burn for 8 days instead of for the expected 1 day. The miracle that this reminded us that we, our Jews, are a light unto the world. All of these are the miracle of Hanukkah, answered Nissim. Since that time, we celebrate and remember to rededicate ourselves just as the Maccabees did in those times. But now it's your turn to spin the dreidel. And Nissim gave the Sultan the dreidel, and the playing continued. The Sultan looked carefully around the room, in between his turns. He noticed the Chanukah lamp, which stood on the table near the door. Why do you place the lamp near the door? Why is it not in the centre of the main table here? Asked the Sultan. Nissim explained. The Chanukah, as we call the Chanukah lamp, is placed near the door so that it can be near the mezuzah. Since it is a mitzvah to light the candles each of the nights of the festival. By placing the lamp near the doorpost, there is a mitzvah on both sides of the door. They continued playing the game of dreidel. But the Sultan, really curious about the many things around him, asked, why do you have so many candles? And Nissim told him that there were 8 days of the festival because the little cruise of oil lasted for 8 days. So we burn an additional candle for each night of the holiday until all 8 candles are burning bright, just as you see here on the last night of Hanukkah. But the Sultan raised his eyebrows and looked again at the Chanukah, counting the candles. There's 9 candles, and one are higher than the other. Why? This candle is not counted as part of the 8. It is called the Shammash. It is the servant that is used to light the other candles. But we place it higher than all the others. We are not permitted to use the light of the candles. So when we enjoy their light, we can say we enjoy the light of the Shamash, answered Nissim. But the Sultan was still not satisfied with this explanation. I think there's a hidden meaning to the Shammash, or else why would you keep it lighted, and why is it on a higher level? Perhaps it's a secret that you don't wish to tell me. That's only known to the Jews. But before Nisim could deny this, the Sultan continued, Come to the palace in 3 days' time and reveal the secret of the Shammash to me. And with these words, the Sultan stood up, bid good night to the family, and left the house. What was Nisim to do? What was he going to tell the Sultan about the secret of the Shammash, since there was no secret? He'd read and studied all the works in the Talmud, and he'd never heard of any secret. Should he make up something that might satisfy the Sultan? For the next 2 days, the doctor's thoughts were filled with this dilemma. On the night of the second day, Nisim decided to take a walk in the cool air. It was so quiet he could hear the echo of his own footsteps. Suddenly, an old man was walking beside him. Nisim had not heard him. He had not noticed him before. They walked for a while in complete silence. And then, turning to Nisim, the old man said, Well, Nisim, who will carry whom? Nisim looked at the old man and wondered if he was crazy. I might be able to carry you, he thought, but you're much too old and frail to carry me. Nisim didn't reply, thinking that perhaps he hadn't heard the man correctly. After a while, they passed a house from which the sounds of weeping could be heard. A coffin near the door told them everything they needed to know. This was a house of mourning. And as they passed, the old man turned to Nisim and asked, Do you think the man in the coffin is alive or dead? Nisim understood at this point that the old man was a madman. As they continued to walk, they passed a field where the wheat was ready for reaping. What full ears of wheat? I'd like to know if they've already been eaten, said the old man. Again, Nisim did not know how to reply. He only shrugged his shoulders. After a while, they turned and walked back in the direction of Nisim's house. As they came to the large house, and the old man said, Ooh, this is a nice house. I wonder if there's anything living inside. Nisim could no longer restrain himself. He laughed and said, This is my house. Come in and rest a while. Refresh yourself with a cup of coffee and see for yourself there are people living here. Nisim hoped the old man would accept his invitation, so that perhaps he would explain the strange remarks that he'd made during their walk. The old man entered the house and gratefully accepted the cup of coffee. Drinking the strong coffee, Nisim was also refreshed, as he hadn't rested for these past 2 days. I told you he worked for the NHS. Thinking about how to solve the riddle of the Shammash. He turned to his guest and asked, What did you mean by your remark about living creatures when we reached the house? And the old man smiled, saying, Living creatures means children. And when there are children full of joy and life, and the parents bring them up with the love of Torah, then the children keep the joy of life forever. When Nisim heard this, his heart was full of a happy feeling, and he answered, Baruch Hashem, blessed be God, for he has given us beautiful children. But they are asleep now. Now Nisim was more assured that the stranger was not out of his mind, but rather filled with a deep wisdom. And so he continued to question the old man. Your words puzzled me, my friend. What did you mean when we passed that wheat field and you wondered whether or not the crop had already been eaten? And the old man answered, Some people spend more than they earn. So I wondered if the people who owned the wheat field had debts that they would need to pay with the crop. Thus the crop would belong to somebody else even before it was reaped. I understand. And what did you mean by asking about the man in the coffin, whether he was dead or alive? That seemed to be an obvious choice, asked Nisim cautiously. Not at all. You see, when a person lives like a man and not like an animal, when he studies Torah and keeps the commandments and does good deeds, then he lives forever. His good deeds and acts of loving kindness live after him, and when his body dies, his soul survives and continues to live in eternal life. People remember him for good. In Safed, the righteous are buried in the part of the cemetery called Beit HaHayim, the house of the living. And so the wicked are dead even in their lifetime, but the righteous, even after their death, are called living. Now Nisim came to the one remaining question. What did you mean when you asked who would carry whom? That didn't seem to make any sense at all. And the old man laughed a little and answered, "When people travel together, and the way seems long and hard, they tell stories, or sing songs, or have a discussion on the point of Talmud. Then the way seems shorter and the travelling lighter, as though one traveller were carrying the other. So what I was asking you is who will begin telling something interesting to the other?" What appeared to have been so mysterious to Nissim in a few moments before now became as easy to understand as anything. He also apologised to the old man for thinking that maybe the old man was crazy. And then they sat in silence. And after a while the old man leaned over and said to Nissim, "I see something is troubling your soul. As Solomon said, a man who should speak of anxiety in his heart will help to lighten it." Sensing that the man had the power to understand, Nissim thought that perhaps he could help him with his problem. He then told the old man about the Sultan's visit and his command to appear before him to explain the secret of the Shammash. "I tried to explain about the Shammash to the Sultan, but he accused me of withholding something from him. How am I supposed to tell him? What am I supposed to tell him tomorrow? What secret does this Shammash contain?" And the old man sat for a moment looking as though he had been expecting this question. "Tell the Sultan that this is the secret of the Shamash. The Shamash stands up high to look out and announce the following. Everyone, look at me. I was once stored in a juicy fruit called an olive. When I grew and almost burst, I called out, 'Pick me, put me in the olive press, take my oil to the last drop so that I can live and be useful.' And so they came and plucked me from the tree and put me in the olive press and threw away my outer skin and saved my inner part, my soul. And now I burn with a happy light that drives away darkness. Learn from me." And so we must do what the Shamash tells us. We must help to spread Torah and light. We must help the weak and the oppressed. We must help the needy and teach those who do not know. It is the way. You will also rise to a higher level and the world will benefit from you. As Nissim listened, tears appeared in his eyes and he wept. And after a while, he raised his head and turned to thank the old man. But he had vanished. "He must have been Elijah the prophet," Nissim said, with wonder and a grateful heart. Now that he had learned the secret of the Shamash, he could go to the Sultan and answer the question.